Marc-André, merci beaucoup. Thanks so much for taking the time. As obviously, as a Canadian Quebecer, I can say there's one thing we all agree on is how bad our telcos are here. So, it's for me, it's an obvious starting point. I'd like to zoom out and talk about the industry, right? So it's like, why is Canada really renowned for having such poor competition in the space? Why are consumers? I imagine if you measure the NPS of telcos in the Canadian sector versus other markets, I imagine it's pretty low versus other markets. So I'd love to zoom out and I'd love to hear you as to like the state of telco in the country, and maybe it's not bad, but you tell me.
Um, yeah, it's definitely bad. That's for sure. It's the closest thing there is to the Stone Age when it comes to telecom in a lot of ways. And one of the main reason is that historically, the history of the telecom industry in Canada is really interesting because historically it came as like in most countries, as a monopoly, and then they gave those monopolies to the big incumbents to deploy telephone poles, and now we're still living with the side effects and the long-lasting effects of that monopoly in the past. And now there's this thing called the CRTC, which there's no equivalent in the US or in other countries per se that regulates the telecom and the broadcasting side of the industry. And what's happening is that CRTC got involved into since most of the networks were there was big funding coming from the governments to deploy those networks and for granting those monopolies. The CRTC got involved at some point and said, "Hey, you should give access to those networks to spark competition in the markets." And depending on who's in charge in the CRTC, the government is going to move from one way to support the incumbents because they maintain and deploy the infrastructure, and some other time, not often, they're going to favor competition and start involving other people. So the situation right now is bad, but we're pretty optimistic about the future because the government output a new policy direction for the CRTC, and they're going to nominate a new chairman soon. So hopefully, we're going to have someone who wants to favor the competition. If you look at the Minister Champagne, the policy direction that he sent in May of this year, he wants to spark competition and he wants to make sure that every Canadians had decent internet access. So that was a long answer to a short question, but a short answer to that question is there was historically big monopolies in telecom, and after that, the CRTC got involved and they regulated a lot of that. So the fight in telecom is not a technology fight; it's a regulation fight.
Yeah. And how does it manifest itself in the marketplace if you know Marc-André? So I mentioned maybe customer satisfaction. I'd be curious, like if you look at, let's say, the level of profitability, like percentage of EBITDA of telcos here versus, let's say, France or England or other comparable markets. I'd be curious, are just like are these companies minting money and like don't want to give up that level of profit? Or is it more just like, because of regulation, there's not enough options, so customers are dissatisfied? So curious as to like how you see this tangibly.
Yeah, it's you see it really tangibly when it comes to ARPU. And like if you look at the ARPU of like South American ISP, like we work with, I have conversations with an ISP in Argentina. The ARPU is $12 per user per month. If you look at Quebecor or Rogers or Shaw, their ARPU is going to be more around the range of 70 plus bucks per month. So it really shows on the revenue they're able to extract from the users. And it also shows, because I think that we need to separate the markets in Canada. So there's the incumbents and there's the infrastructure owners, which are the incumbents. There's cable operators like Quebecor, Rogers, Shaw, which eventually are going to be one entity if it passes. And there's also telecom operators, Telus, Bell, the big guys who operate fiber optics, FTTH or DSL networks. And then you have the competitors, the resellers. Sometimes they call it the TPIAs as well, third party internet access. It's people like us who use existing infrastructure to sell internet services to users. So if you separate those two entities, you'll see that the infrastructure owners, based on how the regulatory framework works in Canada, have held a leverage when it comes to how we're gonna charge to a customer because we use their infrastructure. So there was a big fight in the Canadian market about a regulatory, which the wholesale rates that we use to sell our services were supposed to be lowered, and now all of a sudden the CRTC retracted that decision and went back to the former prices, which ended up in a right now we're in the midst of the setbacks of what's happening in the telecom industry. You have the big incumbents who are actually buying back their competition right now as we speak. The biggest Quebec operator in the past was a company called eBox. They had 67,000 subscribers. They got acquired by Bell. Now that they're acquired by Bell, what do Bell do? They lower prices to their customers. So they kill the competition. If we want to, let's say, offer the exact same pricing that Bell is offering, it would be sometimes below our cost for the first 6 to 12 months, the pricing they're offering. But they're smart. What they do is that they're going to give you that price for 6 to 12 months, and they're going to drag the prices up, so you're going to pay double what you were paying at first.
Yeah, it sounds pretty anti-competitive to me, man, the way they do it, right? And they own the pipes, right? So it's like, and with their balance sheet, they could just take the loss and say, well, the LTV is going to be, we're going to pay it back over X number of years. Hey, you little player over there, good luck surviving.
Yeah,
and
double dipping was probably invented in telecom, and someone who worked in telecom, because it's really, they double dip in everything. Like, they're gonna use their expertise at deploying networks to go see the government and say, hey, we want your money to deploy that little village that we don't have the means to pay for it. The government's going to pay for the infrastructure. They're going to deploy the infrastructure, and then they're going to charge a customer. And once the customers are hooked to their services, they're going to jack up prices, and it's all paid by the Canadians, and they're making money off Canadians. So it's kind of a weird situation that we're in right now in Canada.
yeah, and maybe just for the audience, also, yeah, ARPU is a revenue per user, I imagine. So it's interesting stat, the C70 versus 12. It's just like, yeah, it goes back to like when you see the monthly bill come in. We're going to talk about other markets as well. Maybe personal questions like, why the hell start a company in this space? Right? I feel like, like at the same time, I feel so much pain every time you see the bill. It's like someone needs to start a company in this space, but then it's like, is someone actually crazy enough to do this? So it's like, maybe talk to us about the journey, how you started Oxio, what led you to it.
Yeah, it was a lot of naivete at first that got me into that industry. If I knew how hard it was, I don't know if I'd be in front of you today. But actually, I was in law school, lived at my parents' place, and my parents moved from the city to the suburbs. So before Oxio, we started a first company which transitioned and pivoted into Oxio. And my parents moved from the city to the suburbs, wanted to get an internet connection, and the only thing available was TELUS at 3 megabytes per second at $75 a month. So I was like, what the heck? I cannot even study with that kind of internet connection and stuff. So I called the only person I knew in the telecom space, which was Francis, who was working at Bell at the time, and asked him if he could solve my parents' problem. And we actually started deploying wireless internet networks in rural Quebec. And when we started deploying those networks and solving and trying to bridge the digital divide, we actually realized that the problem why incumbents are offering so bad products and services, it's not the networks per se. It's the software that manages the networks and the software that manages the customer relationship and the customer data and how you as a customer will interact with your internet services. So we saw that there was a regulation, like anything in telecom, there's always regulation involved. There was a regulation that was giving access to incumbents networks in Canada. So we were like, oh, that's the best way to prove our assumption that through software, we could actually provide a better internet service provider. And that's how Oxio came to life. So it started with that really basic assumption that technically incumbents are not deep in their soul really evil. It's not why they have the worst NPS among all industries. It's just because they don't have the right tools to support the customer, and it's not their core expertise. It's operating and maintaining networks. It's not serving customers. And that's why we believe in the future or vision, and why we're investing so much in software at Oxio is that we believe that eventually at some point in time, infrastructure owners are going to be separated with the service providers. So they're going to be infrastructure owners who operate the telecom core infrastructure, and there's going to be the service providers who are going to operate the software and the services that those pipes deliver to the customer. And that's where we're going as globally when it comes to connectivity and telecom, and that's where we're investing so much in that. And we actually proved our hypothesis when we started with that company, because we started in we started building networks when we were Access Telecom in 2017. We pivoted to Oxio in 2019. We started building our software in March 2019, connected our first user, aka me, in November 2019. And fast forward to today, we're 40,000 subscribers. We're spread all across the country. We're available coast to coast. Our software is integrated on Quebec, on Videotron, Rogers, Shaw, all the big guys, and we're able to offer internet services almost everywhere in Canada.
Yeah. So if I understand the model, then you're really just a layer above, sitting on top of the infrastructure where a customer can interface, have much better service. I imagine all digital via app, website, and just a much better overall experience. But then the end product is still being managed by the core infrastructure players like the Bell, Quebecors of this world.
It's a bit more complicated. We use the empty pipes of those incumbents, but we have data centers across the country where our core network, our core routers, push internet into those pipes to connect our users. So we actually have a physical components, an infrastructure component of our company, but you're right. Most of our focus and what we do is building software on top of that physical component to provide a more seamless experience and eliminate all the friction when it comes to telecom.
Yeah. And what are your customers saying, right? You have, like you mentioned, 44,000 subscribers.
40, yeah.
So what's the feedback? Like in terms of value proposition, why are they giving you their money?
Yeah, we're actually right now the most loved ISP in the whole country. If you look at any kind of reviews, if you look at Plan Hub, which is like an aggregator internet website that you can compare internet plans across the country. If you look at Plan Hub, Google reviews, all those kind of things, we're always number one in any kind of websites. And also, we're the most we provide the most fair and sustainable pricing. And what we mean by that is, okay, maybe Bell and Videotron are going to be able temporarily to do anti-competitive behavior and drop their costs like below our cost, their price below our cost, but they're going to do that for like 6 to 12 months. And after that, they're going to jack their prices up. For us, we never increased since the inception of the company the prices of our subscriber. And why? It's because we have a tangible model with our software. We're able to automate most of the operations that you need to usually do when you're a telecom industry, which lowers our operational expense to run the company, which we gives that economy back to the subscribers. So we're able to offer better pricing. And second, we have a model our profitability model is that we aim for 24 months payback in everything that we do. We want to win the customer over the long term, and we don't make a single dollar before 24 months. The first 24 months are just to pay back our investments, the equipments that we lend to the users, the marketing costs, the operational costs, and all that kind of stuff to offer you the services. So we aim for a 24 months payback, and after that, we start making a profit after we've shown that we are a value add in your life.
Yeah. I'm going to go back to the comment you said. It kind of stuck with me, right? Being naive, like as an entrepreneur, it's like you don't always know dans quoi tu t'embarques, as they say. It's like you never know what you're getting yourself into. the journey to start this and have success and have like, like raised 50 million, have 40,000 subscribers, I imagine it was one that was very perilous and like with a lot of detours, right? Like at what point did you realize that, hey, like, you know what, no matter what, despite this insane regulatory environment, I think everyone deep down, even people not in business, knows like, hey, something's wrong in this market, right? Like when did you realize like, no, I'm going to put my foot down and no matter what, I'm going to tackle this?
Um, since day one, actually, we were deploying like with Access Telecom. I was actually the guy going to the customer premises, installing the antennas on top, and answering customer calls on the top of the roof of the customer, dropping the cable lines down to their kitchen or where they would put the router, whatever. And I knew that we were onto something. And you can see it's really funny if you look at the first email that I sent to an investor, but it was all about changing the customer experience in the telecom landscape. Maybe wasn't using the same words that I was using now in terms of what's the vision and where we're going, but the end goal is to actually eliminate all frictions and make network frictionless, and provide the best customer experience when it comes to connectivity. So I knew since day one. I didn't knew how hard it would be to get to where we are today. And I probably don't know how hard it's going to be to get to the next 5 years as well.
Yeah, I guess as they say, la question qui tue, right? Like, you're not, obviously amazing idea, great traction, but at some point the rubber's going to hit the road. And you said, acquisitions, people buying you up. Is it in your roadmap to like, hey, maybe one day Bell will come with, a number that's going to be huge, that's going to be life changing to you? Like I could think of the guys at Fibre Noire, which kudos to them for selling. I can't really take anything away. It was a great acquisition, but at the same time it's like you're going up against such huge beasts, right? Like, so curious to hear you about exit strategy if you've thought about it.
Yeah, no, I'm here till I have gray hair. You'll have to kick me out of my board is gonna have to kick me out of the company before we sell. I really like the reason why we were able to hold on to what we know and go through those tough phases at Oxio. I think it's that because we're really idealist, but put actions into words. Put yeah, whatever. Put words into action, or the other. Anyway, we were able to walk the talk basically, but I'm still a huge idealist in whatever I do. I prefer to see life with my pink glasses, and like I think that one of the biggest moonshot that you could do for Canadians is to tackle that oligopoly right now, because it has deep roots into our culture, deep roots into the lobbying forces that drives the country forward. And it's now a utility, and it's one of the things that is the most needed for people to get connected to the world and stuff. Like the importance that the internet has right now is so important that I think that it's worth a shot at trying to do whatever it takes to just make it. And I'm never gonna like my goal is not to make money for me personally. My goal is to change the Canadian landscape and to put a dent into that market. So I'm really not into selling.
Yeah, hats off to you, man. Hats off to you. Like, very good answer. I love that answer. Like I would say, as a Canadian consumer, like, I really hope it works, and you have to, that decades long staying power. Because you mentioned something, and I don't know, maybe it's a stretch, but you mentioned cultural impact, right? And like a lot of the hit on Canadian businesses is, oh, we play too safe versus the Americans, and like we don't have
Yeah.
enough like entrepreneurs that swing for the fences. Well, clearly, I'm talking to one now that's swinging for the fences. That's point A. But point B is that when you look at the market, it's like, well, we seem governed, like the big industry seem governed by these huge companies that like are monoliths, and like, no offense to have friends that work in them, but like, sorry, like, f you, like, they're big monoliths, right? So having the courage to go up against them and try and break it up, and then actually managing to do it, hopefully, is going to be a good cultural marker, right? Saying, hey, no, listen, we're going to have more free market competition, right? So more free market competition on stuff, like you said, this utility, while keeping some aspects of our culture. We won't get into healthcare and other stuff, but like, I think on this part, yes, more competition is going to be a good thing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, if you just look what's happening, and when I said that we were close to the Stone Age when it comes to telecom in Canada, is that if you look at other countries, you're going to see that they pay less, they have better products, they have better service, they have better everything. And Canadian telcos are going to frame it as, oh, but our country is bigger, or like we have bigger costs, or climate is different and stuff like that. But that's actually not true. And if you look at the data, actually, some big incumbents have tried to get their name out of surveys that were sent all across the world to understand where was the countries that pay the most for the internet services and stuff. So there's something happening right here. They love the big black box of the telecom that Canadians don't understand what they're paying for, the opaque pricing, the opaque knowledge of what is a telecom networks, because if you don't know about something, you just cannot change it, right? So our job with Oxio, if you want to play a long-term game with that, is just to educate Canadians and start sparking some kind of a revolution about why are they paying what they're paying and why we think they could have eventually, if they support us and they support the movement, better pricing, better products, better services.
I hope to join the rebellion. So,
Yeah.
any lessons from Y Combinator like that you think are interesting that you're applying today?
I've I've learned a lot before, during, and after joining Y Combinator. When you talk about swinging for the fences, it's just normalized in that community to swing for the fences. You're not a hero for swinging to the fences. You're just a founder doing his job, which I really believe. Like my idealistic side shows again, but like I think that you should swing for the fences, and I think that we have amazing companies, we have an amazing country, we have everything to foster innovation and to have an amazing entrepreneur community. What we lack is more success, more people that have swung for the fences and now can give back to the community with that mentality. I think that's what we lack. So for me, it was eye-opening to go to the US and see how they treated scaling companies more as a science and like as how to support that company, knowing that even if the founder do everything, maybe it's going to fail at some point, but we're not going to ridiculize or look down on that founder that tried and failed, which I believe sometime in Canada, it's hard for some people to look at a company failed, especially if they invested money in it. It's never fun to lose money, but it's part of the greater good. It's part of the ecosystem that needs those things needs to happen so we can have some successes.
Yeah, yeah. If there was no failure, there'd be no success, right? So
Exactly.
nobody would be trying, right? Um, you spoke about raising some money, right? You raised money from some really institutional investors that I imagine have some big goals. Maybe talk about a little bit of that process, raising the 50 million. You mentioned you also have I forget the gentleman's name, but from Freeze. I'd love to hear about the investment strategy and how you're approaching it.
Yeah, we raised 50 million to this day. We have a capital intensive business, so it was really out of necessity for us to get capital to get going. If I knew how much capital I needed to start a telecom company, I would probably have stopped from the start. That's part of the naivete side. I wasn't financially savvy when I started, and I learned the hard way my finances 101 courses as I was running the company. Um, we Our last round was we raised 25 million. Our lead investor was Xavier Niel, the founder of Free, which is the biggest telecom disruptor in the world. You can Google him, you'll see that he's the reason why if you go to Europe, France, Spain, and all those countries, you're gonna pay like $5, €5 a month for unlimited data plans on your mobile and stuff. He's an amazing guy. He's also a really good angel investor. He's investing through Kima Ventures in a lot of tech startups. He's the biggest angel investor in the world, I think. If you look at Kima Ventures, it's all his money. So he invests all his money through Kima Ventures. So yeah, and we actually, since we're tackling one of the biggest institutional part of the landscape companies in the country, the big incumbents, most of them have ties with financier in Canada, right? So it was hard for us to raise money in Canada to disrupt the person signing the checks at the end of the day. You can talk about this to Bryce Chichok from and Tony Lacavera from Freedom Mobile that started Freedom Win Mobile at the time. They had to go race to Egypt to start their actually carrier provider. And I kind of read Antonio Lacavera's book, and I got inspired. Like, hey, if you really want to do this and you really want to raise money, you're gonna have to go international. So I really didn't had any contact outside of Canada, even outside of Montreal, pretty much. And I decided to apply to Y Combinator, and it took 2 times, I think, and we got in the second time. And since then, we got we got access to all the amazing investors that YC has access, and that enabled us to keep scaling as we are right now.
Yeah, it's a great story of like, entrepreneurship and hustle and not giving up. Like you mentioned Xavier and Free, and it's like we were joking about before recording, but it's like, like how there's so many French people in the country, and especially now I'm seeing more and more people like keep their French numbers. Like how wild is this? Like I have this happen more than once where it's like, hey, do you mind if I call you? But it's this weird European number. I'm like, sure, I don't care. But they're like, because I don't want to give my plan because it costs me so little. I'm like, that is a sign that something is wrong if there is one, right? Like people don't want a Canadian number because they're going to give up their European plan, right? So obviously Free has really done a good job disrupting it. So like, yeah, I think you're in good company with Xavier.
Yeah, and also speaking of like swinging for the fences, Xavier has always encouraged his founders to never sell and just keep building the company so it becomes real big companies. And that's one of the reasons why we decided to go with him for a Series A instead of going with a traditional VC firm.
Have you thought of like the broader vision of the company? Like, where do you want to take it? I know you mentioned like, like as a founder, wearing the founder hat, like really thinking long term, which I think is refreshing. Um,
Yeah,
what is the longer 5-10 year strategy going maybe outside of Canada or just like dominating here? Like curious to hear you.
yeah. So from a customer standpoint, we're building the connectivity platform for the internet. So in plain English, what does it mean? It's just that there's going to be a separation between infrastructure and service providers. The service providers are going to differentiate themselves by the software they build and by the integration they do with the networks available, the connectivity networks available to them. So today, you're going to have maybe a fiber optics or cable connection for your home, for your Wi-Fi home, and you're going to have mobile services. But 10, 20, 30 years from now, with the self-driving cars, with every single devices on the internet that are going to be connected to the internet, like they are connected to the electricity today. Eventually, you're gonna have multiple connectivity networks that you'll need to integrate with to power your devices. So that's where we're going on the service front, because eventually what we want is to integrate with any kind of existing telecom networks and be the accessibility layer and the software layer that you go on our website or in our app, and no matter what kind of connectivity services you need or you want, we're going to be able to provide it to you and eliminate the friction to providing it to you and managing everything.
Yeah, it's a great vision, right? I love this concept of accessibility layer and using software to provide it. Where it's like, is one thing that we've learned is like, the telcos are not great at software. That's one
Yeah.
thing. So being able to focus on the end user experience with this layer, I find that it's a fascinating vision. So it's like, I imagine it's like, is it one of these like classic and to borrow the like the classic phrase of like blue ocean? Do you see a lot of competition in the space, or is it really just an untapped market that doesn't barely exist yet?
So there's we have a lot of competition in Canada for sure. We don't have competition in our vision of where we want to go and solely be focusing on software. Uh, People in the telecom space focus on software as a necessary evil. We focus this as it's our core focus. We don't do anything else. The rest, it's their expertise. It's what they do. We want to partner with them to provide the best services available. Like we believe in the future, they're going to want to partner with us for all their software needs, even though they're on the eyes of the customer, they could be competitor. We're going to integrate with them and work with them in some ways for sure. Um, and also just to give I know it could be complex for someone who and even for someone who is in the telecom space. It's like we just want to do in some ways we want to do what AWS did for computing power, like, but for telecom networks. That's what Oxio want to do eventually. And we're going to do that as a B2C company in Canada, but we're rolling out a new software in January in Q1 2023, and we're going to start being the operating system for other ISPs elsewhere in the world. So we're going to be able to get that data, that expertise from other ISPs who are operating in other countries, get the expertise and knowledge that we have for the telecom industry in Canada, and iterate and build the best software to automate all your processes and run your operations as a telecom company. So that's really where we're headed right now.
Yeah, I would say it's such a fascinating vision. And the one maybe selfish point I'd say is like, if you do have success internationally with the B2B software, is selfishly please reinvest those profits in Canada for the B2C side. So just don't forget about, if it does grow to be like the real AWS, like maybe the small little Canadian market, just don't forget it, please.
We'll never forget about our roots. And it's actually like operating a B2C company in Canada is a critical pillar of a strategy in terms of operating a software, because you cannot go as deep with the software you're building as an OS if you never operated those kind of companies. You're only going to scratch the surface if you're trying to build software in that space, but you've never been an operator. So for us, being an operator, knowing what in real time customer wants, we can use that knowledge and put it back into our software to serve other ISPs across the globe. And eventually we're going to be able to get that international expertise, put that back into our software, and give it back to Canadian consumers as well. So it's going to be a win-win for everyone.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned one point about finance and learning on the job. We spoke a little bit about some notions of company building as well, right? So like while I have you, I'm like taking notes here to learn. What have you learned about company building, right? You mentioned radical transparency is a value. Like I'd like to hear about some lessons of like as you're on your journey building, a gang of people that are on the pirate ship with you.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned finance, so maybe I can elaborate on that, but I didn't knew anything about finance when I started the company. I could do to the max, like my biggest ability as a financier was to do napkin calculation in the past. I didn't knew what EBITDA was, or ARPU, or gross margin, or maybe gross margin, but that was like the top of my knowledge. And actually just surrounding myself with people who are financially savvy. One of our first investor, Vincent, is a really amazing guy, is really smart, and he knows the ins and outs of finance. So I actually was going to his place and had dinner with him on a weekly basis. And I bought the University Finance 101 book, and I was reading the book during the week, and at dinner that week I was going to him and I had a notebook and I was asking him questions about how do you calculate all those kind of things. And what I realized is that even if you don't have to be like a hardcore investment banker to be a CEO. Of course, you don't have to be that, but you need some fundamentals to be able to do some good decisions and to put your stamp of approval in what you're doing. You're accountable for everything that is happening in your company. So money is a pretty important part of your company as well.
But what about on the culture side, right? So you spoke about having this concept of transparency. So like what's the secret sauce to like, have a happy, engaged team?
Yeah. We never lost an Oxio employee to this day. So I'm going to touch wood right now to make sure that it doesn't happen soon. It's going to happen at some point. It's going to break my heart, but it hasn't happened yet. And I don't know if I have any secret apart from the fact of being your true self as a founder and what you want to emulate. Like, what is your vision of like where you want to take that company, what feels right for you, and just try to emulate it and find like-minded people who want to do that. For me, radical transparency was really important. We've been fully remote since day one. I never had a real job. I was an entrepreneur since I was 14. For me, workspaces were coffee shops, where my parents, my room in my parents' house, where everything I could find an internet connection. And that's how I envisioned the company as well, to be fully remote and to embrace that remote culture. And also, we want to hire the smartest and the brightest, and people want to work really hard with us to solve those problems. And if you want to power those people, if we want to have all the horsepower that they can provide to the company and make them happy, I believe that we need to give them as much context as possible about the company so they can learn the context, why we made that call, the data about everything, so they can make their own opinions and their own decisions when they're making a call, because it's really important to solve complex problems. So at first, radical transparency, we kind of came out of necessity. We wanted to give as much context to everyone as possible. And after that, it kind of became us. Like, even in my personal life, I cannot even lie anymore in my personal life or do things, because radical transparency is so important for us as a culture that, like, if I go to I think about going the white lie route, I feel that I'm not gonna be true to the values, and I'm gonna say it right up. So it kind of changed me personally as well.
Yeah, yeah, I love that aspect. And I think if there's any part of company building, there is this notion of you just have to be transparent, but also just honest, right? So it's kind of the same, it's two sides of the same coin of when shit's going bad, you can't just like put your head in the sand. Like there's, especially as a founder, you're like, you have to tackle the problem head on. So it touches very much the kind of the same value of like, well, great if things are going well, what's the next step? And then if things are going wrong, there's this introspection of like, okay, well, I need to improve, I need to figure out what's wrong, and then everyone needs to know that it's not working. There's no like, no, it's okay, guys, it's all great.
Yeah,
You have to be honest about it,
people will see right through this anyway. They're gonna know that things are not going well. Like, you cannot hide everything forever. And actually, what I found is that people knowing that it's not going well are gonna do everything they can to turn the ship around and make it go in the right direction. So it only has been like perks to be radically transparent. The only, like, there's also trade-off of being radically transparent. When we make decisions, we survey our team, we ask for their feedbacks and stuff like that. So to process that old thinking and to make sound decisions when you're trying to be radically transparent could sometimes take more time than if you would be a dictator and make your own calls. But I think that the downsides are way lesser than the upsides that it brings to being radically transparent.
yeah. Marc-André, this has been such a pleasure, man. I could bug you for like another hour. Maybe final question for people to connect, learn more about your mission, Oxio, and what you guys are doing. What's the best way?
Website oxio.ca. If not, we're on all the platforms like LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, everything. And you can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, I think, Twitter, that kind of stuff. Marc-André Campagna, and I'm sure you're gonna find me. There's not a lot of people call that name, so it was really nice talking to you too.
Merci beaucoup, Marc-André.
Merci.